Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on this very interesting study. Since the introductions have been done, permit me to start on existing protocol, or sit as the case may be, on existing protocol. So I'm reviewing the book, The Effects of Bwari Conflict and Enugu Sit at Home on Women. I want to start out by pointing to some of the strengths of the book and also providing some of the core questions that guided the study. So the study was animated by 4 key questions. One is, what is the origin of Bwari conflict and sit at home in Enugu? The second is, what are the causes of Bwari conflict and sit at home in Enugu? Third, what are the effects of Bwari conflict and sit at home in Enugu? And the fourth was, what are the strategies adopted in managing Bwari conflict and sit at home in Enugu? I think the main strength of this study emerges pretty early on in the book, and it's that the empirical base of the work is quite rich. So there's a lot of new information in this study pertaining to these conflicts that I think this book does contribute to our understanding of these particular cases as well as conflict in general in Nigeria. So for instance, the study helps clarify how the relationship between cultism, chieftaincy tuttles, and inter-ethnic distrust between indigenous and settler populations contribute to triggering and sustaining intercommunal conflict in Nigeria. And I think this helps dispel some of the monocausal explanations that are often advanced by say, media or even some academic studies that investigate intercommunal violence, such as the situation in Bwari. I think also the periodization of the studies is quite interesting. So I'll say that the authors develop quite a rich historical account of the long-running causes of these disputes. And I think implicit in the juxtaposition of these conflicts, not as explicit, but at least implied, is some kind of assessment of the changing nature of conflict in Nigeria's Fourth Republic. So this isn't something they delved into very explicitly, but in choosing a conflict that, in the case of Bwari, kicked off in 2017 on one hand, and another conflict that, in the case of the sit-at-home situation, and I shouldn't call it a conflict really, in Enugu, commenced in 2021, they allow us to see how the second decade of the Fourth Republic and the third decade differ in some respects in the kinds of conflicts or the kinds of, you could say, social disturbances or instabilities that have emerged. And I can come back and say more about that when I'm offering some critical comments. But I think this historical depth and the richness of the empirical material gathered are some of the really pronounced strengths of this study. And finally, while it's well known that conflict disproportionately affects women, the study also broadens the empirical record of how such gendered effects occur, clearly showing that these effects are multifaceted and they cut across issues of livelihood and economic well-being, but also they affect the psychosocial well-being of women and their senses of self-worth. In several cases, pushing women who were the breadwinners or at least were economically empowered back into positions of economic subjugation. So I think they do provide quite a nuanced assessment of the shifting nature of women's sense of stability and self-worth when conflicts of this nature occur. I want to limit my critical reflections to 2 broad areas. The methodology and case selection would be one area I focus on, and then secondly, some epistemological concerns that I think the study could have delved further into or better clarified, and maybe this can provide some opportunities for future research in these areas. So thinking in terms of methodology and case selection, so I agree with the keynote speaker that there's no reason to say there's no basis for comparing conflict in Bwari to sit at home in Enugu. It's true that there can be a basis for such a comparison, but I don't think the basis is explicitly justified in a sufficient manner in a study. So, one can still read this and come away with the question, why exactly were these two cases selected? And I think there might be perfectly sensible reasons to just juxtapose these particular cases, but more justification would have been quite helpful in providing a rationale for the case selection. So it can sometimes read like it's two separate studies just kind of sandwiched, and that their sort of juxtaposition is incidental. But I think there could have been ways in which the comparison could have been made a bit more explicit. The reasons for the comparison could have been made a bit more explicit and a bit more central to the core questions of the study. So for instance, Bwari and Enugu, the situations that are profiled are actually quite separate kinds of events. So the sit at home, on one hand, aspires to be a non-violent form of protest. Of course, in some cases, we did see forms of violence associated with it, but at heart, it seemed to aspire to non-violence. While on the other hand, the 2007 case in Bwari was explicitly a case of violent conflict, resulting in some deaths, resulting, in the burning down of some markets. So you could almost see this as a case of, on one hand, a protest movement, and on the other hand, a case of an intercommunal conflict. So it's not exactly clear why we're comparing a protest to an intercommunal conflict, but I still think that there is some scope for comparison, because having such different cases allows us to assess how different events of this nature can in fact impact in different ways on women's livelihoods and well-being. So a core question that takes that difference as central, maybe poses the question as, how might protest on the one hand and intercommunal conflict on the other hand have differential impacts on women's well-being, would be one way to embed the comparison within the driving question of the research. But because the research was the driving questions were phrased as separate, you don't really get that unified comparative leverage that I think you could have otherwise accomplished if the comparison was embedded at the heart of the core question. Another so that's pertaining to the study design. I think some methodological points that might have been worth clarifying further as well relate to the anonymity rule that was utilized in categorizing respondents. So in some cases, the respondents are anonymous, and in other cases, they seem to be identified by name. So in sensitive research of this nature, I think that some more explicit clarification of what cases, we will have respondents speak in their own name, or what cases in which they will be pseudonymized might be quite important. And in fact, maybe a standard rule that pseudonymizes all respondents, for instance, could have been a little more, let's say, standard, you could say. So that kind of a systematic approach, I think, in this sort of research would be more, I think, best practice, given, again, the sensitivity of the nature of the responses being solicited. I think also the study area could have been delimited a little more clearly. So, of course, Bwari is an area council, which is comparable to a local government in other contexts, you could say. And Enugu is a state, right? So I know that the research in practical terms probably was limited to one or so local governments in Enugu, but I think we could have heard what those local governments are in particular. In terms of the kind of epistemological questions I wanted to raise, I've sort of started to address some of them already, but maybe one way to summarize them is to say that perhaps identifying a core question across the four areas that the research sought to investigate could have really brought some more more of a clearer through line across the entire study. So a lot of the literature review focuses on debates about the origins of women's, the effect on conflict, the gendered effects of conflict, right? So the literature review focuses on that. Then the theoretical framework, on the other hand, focuses on the causes of conflict. You see, so there isn't as clear a through line between a literature review that focuses on debates about effects of conflict and a theoretical framework that focuses on causes of conflict. You see, so because we're trying to address both causes and effects, the through line between the set of literatures that anchor this study and the theory that tries to explain the key factors it's investigating, I think become a bit disjointed. And I think relatedly, the opportunity to resolve that might have emerged if, as I mentioned earlier, the core question tied the issue of protest to the issue of conflict. So then the literature review could maybe have helped us clarify what are the existing debates about the differential effects of protest and conflict on women. And then the theoretical framework might propose a way to explain how protest and conflict differ in their effects on women. So I think, for future studies or work that sort of deepens some of this very rich empirical material, that could be one angle that the authors take. And I think that will allow them flesh out some of the very fascinating findings that emerged in fieldwork. This recommendation section, I won't go into a lot of detail about, but it's also quite a strong contribution of this study. And the recommendations, one of the strengths of the recommendations is that they targeted multiple actors, from the state government to the federal, from civil society to traditional institutions. I think that's quite a commendable approach, rather than pushing out recommendations to a kind of, with no real target audience. I might suggest, though, that one additional set of actors that some recommendations could be targeted towards is social movements. Because I feel somewhere in this study is a reflection about the tactics that social movements use. Sit-at-home protest is one that you've identified as a possible tactic pursued by non-state actors. I think one of your findings can help social movements think about some of the effects of utilizing a tactic such as sit-at-home. And a recommendation tailored towards helping social movements think about how that tactic can be better improved to have less of an impact on women, or to reshape its impact on women, could be quite a helpful recommendation. I won't dwell on sort of typos, repetitions, those editorial issues, because that the book's printed, and I think actually, by and large, the book was quite strong on that. But of course, those are some notes that I also have that maybe in a second edition could be resolved. But ultimately, I thought this is quite a helpful contribution to our understanding of conflict in the Fourth Republic, and how it's changed across the decades of the Fourth Republic, as well as our understanding of how conflict events and protest events shape livelihoods and self-perception among Nigerian women. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Okay, so standing on the already established protocols, thank you so very much. Angela, for the opportunity. Now, Dr. Said has made my work a lot more easier, because he has touched on almost all the things I had jotted. But I have to say this, I actually thought that after the review, that's when the book will now be produced into a hard copy, because there are a whole lot of, challenges with the project. Maybe not a lot, so I don't sound like I'm making it look. So I thought the book would be published after this review, but it's already been published. So I really don't know how helpful this review is going to be. But be that as it may, I'm sure there might be a second edition of the book, so it will probably help in whatever is going to happen. But it's a research, so it's continuous. Okay, so he talked about the research questions. The study actually had no objectives. I don't know if you noticed, but it had research questions which he has highlighted. And I thought that being a research project, it should have had set out objectives so it can guide the entire project, okay? Because objectives will actually provide like a roadmap to what you're actually supposed to be going out there to do, okay? But that's not to say that what they did was not okay. It's okay. After all, objectives are supposed to be derived from the questions, right? So I commend their effort. Like he said, the work has a lot of strength. Apart from the fact that it has provided additional literature in this area, some of the key findings of the study are very useful. But in stating the questions, I also expected that there should have been another question added to it, which is steps that can be taken to prevent future occurrences of some of these conflicts that we seem to experience all the time in the country. Okay, I just added that in my own notes, but they didn't have that. Okay, because that will also help them to properly recommend to the different actors, that are supposed to implement these recommendations. Right, so the methodology, as he said, it's not very strong, okay? So some of the things I noted, which I think actually is because there were no clear objectives stated, so it made the methodology a little bit, not really what it would have been for a study of this magnitude. Now, I also have this feeling, I don't know whether it was because of the finances available. These studies are good enough to be standalone studies, not bringing them together. Because sometimes when you're reading, at one point you're reading Bwari conflict, at another point you are in Enugu, sit at home, protest and all that. So there's to try to find a nexus, between the two of them seems to be a bit difficult because they are not the same thing, actually. One was like a spontaneous thing that happened, and after that ended. This Enugu sit at home has been on since 2021, and it's still dragging. It's still there even as we speak now. So you try to bring the two of them together. Where do we find the connect? Beyond the fact that it has effect on women, you cannot really place the connection, but it's okay. I'm sure it was because of the finances. So, but whatever it is, it's been done. Okay. So when you look at the Bwari conflict, for instance, it started as a result of tussle for chieftaincy, position, occasioned by the indigenous settler. The struggle for dominance, power struggle, and all of that. The Baggy people are trying to establish their dominance as the owners of Bwari, or the indigenes of Bwari, and then the Hausa settler, by what they wrote in their study, also wants to lord it over them and all of that. And so that kind of created the tensions that led to that violence in Bwari market. Of course, the effect of violence, no matter the magnitude, will always affect people, particularly women and children. And in this case, it took place in the market, so the impact was much more on the women in the market. Now, beyond the fact that lives were lost, their businesses were also lost, their means of livelihood were lost. The keynote speaker talked about the impact on the family. Once there's a violent conflict, and maybe in the process, the head of the family gets killed in the conflict, the woman is the one who will bear the brunt of that effect. And so a whole lot goes on after that. The difficulty to adjust, the trauma, the psychological problems and all of that come with it, and so on. So the crisis in Bwari was I don't want to use the word one-off thing, because there could be a reoccurrence if there's a trigger. But for now, that has ended because somehow, somewhere, government was able to arrest the situation by imposing another chief on them, and so on and so forth. So that has been handled. But the Enugu sit-at-home protest strategy, which we know is a kind of civil disobedience, actually, and it's been ongoing since 2021, and it's still ongoing till today. In some parts of the South, it's actually a regional thing. It's not just an Enugu thing, but the study is located in Enugu town. So the impact of that is something that we cannot finish discussing here, because it's ongoing. Every day it keeps unfolding. I think recently in Abia State, we have seen what is going on and all of that. And this is still ongoing. So long as their leader, Nnamdi Kanu, is not released unconditionally, it is still ongoing. So they were able to establish the major causes, which of course started from the actualization of the sovereign state of Biafra, and then the subsequent arrest of their leader, Nnamdi Kanu. So this protest is still there, it's ongoing. We don't know when it's going to end, and so on. Okay, so like I said, they identified the major causes of the crisis as the tussle for chieftaincy and the arrest of Nnamdi Kanu on the other side. Okay, so the major effects which the study identified as the effects of the conflict in the two communities, I decided to just put the two of them together because they all are the same. They talked about the human cost, which of course lives were lost in the process. They talked about the educational effects, which students were kept out of school for a while. I mean, imagine that you don't have to go to school on Mondays. Mondays are like the major days of the working week and a major day of the working week. And if you don't have to go to school on a Monday, a lot will have to, you would have lost a whole lot. They talked about the economic effects, the socio-psychological effects, I added the other part, which is trauma, displacement, depression, under emotional effects, because all of this will happen if there's a major, violent conflict, which the keynote speaker also mentioned. There's also the loss of access to food and all of that, family stress and domestic violence. We know what happens when there's conflict in any particular community and situation, and then the humanitarian challenges as well. Okay, so the recommendations for me are okay because they targeted key actors, like my colleague said, the federal government, the FCT government, the Enugu state government, civil society organizations, the traditional institutions, and all of that. They didn't target individuals. Individuals have a part to play in conflict. We also need to bring the role of the individual person in conflict. And then, apart from that, I actually also thought that the recommendation should be itemized, into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So it makes implementation easier. What can government do in the short term? What can they do in the medium term? And what can they do in the long term? Okay, so yes, the theory that was used, sorry I'm going here and there, but I have to do that because I'm trying to look through my notes. The theories that we adopted, the first one for the Bwari conflict, they adopted the integrated threat theory. And then the second one, they adopted the Emil Durkheim's theory of solidarity. I actually think it's okay, they are good enough, but a bit not too adequate for this study, because I thought, because the study is focused on women in particular, they should have been more gender-specific theories of conflicts that could be used in trying to analyze this study. However, what they used is still okay. For future studies, if there's going to be any on this particular issue, it will help to, make the study a lot better than what it is. So thank you very much for the opportunity and for listening to us. Thank you.